Good evening. I'm Mary Beth McAteer Margolis from Melrose Mass Television, and this is a special edition of On Main Street. Today, I'm going to be talking with our two Democratic primary candidates for State Senate in the 5th Middlesex District. First, we'll be talking to Jason Lewis, current incumbent and senator. Thanks for coming with us this evening, Jason.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
And after we finish chatting with Jason, we'll have our local Melrosian challenger, Sam Hammer, joining us. We're going to be doing things a little differently this evening. We're going to first talk to Senator Lewis and ask him some questions. And then when we're completed our interview, we'll have Ms. Hammer on, and we'll be asking her virtually the same questions. And each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions. We may have a couple of follow-ups depending upon how our conversation goes. And these questions are my own questions. I have used information from the candidates' websites and local newspapers, including the Melrose Free Press and the Winchester Star. So thank you for joining us this evening, Senator Lewis.
My pleasure. Thank you for hosting this forum.
Thank you. You're welcome. So you're pretty well known in the area, but for those people who don't keep up with politics and don't even really know that there might be a primary coming up for the Democratic State Senate seat, which will be on September 4th, 5th? 4th.
Day after Labor Day.
Day after Labor Day, Tuesday the 4th. Yep.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit, give us a little background on yourself and who you are, how long you've been in the Senate, and why you would like an opportunity to be reelected?
Well, I've had the privilege and the honor of being the state senator for the city of Melrose and the rest of the 5th Middlesex District for just over 4 years. I succeeded Catherine Clark when she was elected to Congress. And prior to that, I served in the State House of Representatives for a number of years. I also have a lot of experience working in the private sector. I helped to build 2 different software companies. Originally, a lot of people don't know this, but I was actually born in South Africa and emigrated with my family to the United States when I was 12 years old. And in fact, it was my experience growing up in the 1970s when South Africa was under the cruel and racist apartheid system, and seeing that up close, which really is one of the main things that inspired me to go into public service and to really do my part to try to fight for economic justice and social justice and civil rights. And in terms of running for re-election, well, you know, I feel that I've been effective in delivering results for Melrose and the other communities I represent, and I imagine we can talk more about that. And also, even in the short time I've been in the state Senate, I've established myself as a leader on a range of progressive issues that are important to working families and our communities, including healthcare policy, education, and a variety of economic justice issues that are important to our families.
And we're going to talk about all of those.
Great.
Very shortly. Just remind our viewers what cities and towns are part of your district, besides Melrose.
Yeah, so the district includes the cities of Melrose and Malden, and then the towns of Reading, Stoneham, Wakefield, and part of Winchester, which is my hometown.
Right. Great. Okay. So in looking around at everybody's websites and whatnot, we've been trying to identify what you kind of bring out there as what you see as the key issues facing the district. And I guess what I'd like to hear from you is what you're hearing from your constituents, what you think they are, and what kind of actions and proposals you have coming forward. So maybe what we can do is just kind of give a little quick glimpse of what the issues are, and then we'll talk about some of them individually that I'm sure you have on your list.
Okay. So just a kind of quick overview would be certainly what I would call local economic development. How do we continue to ensure that we have thriving communities, that we're places where we are, people want to live, work, and raise their children and retire. Healthcare is a major issue for many of our families. and our seniors as well. Education and how we fund our public schools and how we ensure that every child has access to a high quality education. And then just generally concerns for working families, just the high cost of living, whether that is the cost of early education, the cost of college, housing, transportation, and so on. And how do we continue, even though this is a thriving region and the economy is very strong and we have the lowest unemployment rate we've seen in decades, many families, even not just lower income families, but middle income families are still having a challenging time. And how do we address those issues?
Okay. So one of the first ones that is near and dear to my heart, from my personal experience, is education. And we know that there's been lots of talk about Chapter 70 at the State House and your efforts, and certainly charter school reimbursement, special needs reimbursement for funding for special needs programs, universal pre-K, full-day kindergarten, which we've been fortunate to be able to offer in Melrose. Yes. What do you see as those, priorities within education, and what kinds of actions are you taking, or going forward? What are you thinking for the next legislative session?
Critical, absolutely critical issue. And let me say at the outset that I believe fundamentally that every child deserves access to a high quality education, all the way from preschool through higher education, and that should be regardless of their zip code, their family's income, their ethnic background. Doesn't matter. Every child should get the same opportunity, a good start in life. And I recall when my own daughter, who's now actually just finished freshman year in college, when she was in kindergarten. I have two daughters, and that was a time when we had we had a recession back in the early 2000s. There were cuts in education funding, and librarians were laid off at the school where she was. There were cuts in art and music, and fees were increased. And that was one of the things that, along with my background, and sort of interest in civil rights issues, but that was the other major issue that got me interested in running for office was, that we should be able to provide, these weren't luxuries. Having librarians in school, having access to art and music, having reasonable class sizes should be something that every school has. And it's been a motivating issue for me since I've been in office. I've worked very hard to reform the state's Chapter 70 school funding formula, and we've had some success there. I filed legislation which created the so-called Foundation Budget Review Commission, which analyzed the school funding formula, came forward with some very good recommendations to update the formula in terms of healthcare costs, special education, English language learners. And in fact, since then, I've really fought in the state Senate to see those recommendations implemented. And in fact, the state Senate has twice passed legislation to do that. Unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten it onto the Governor Baker's desk yet, but that will continue to be a top priority for me if I'm reelected. And that's really to make sure that our K through 12 education system is as strong as it can be, and every school district, including Melrose and everyone else, has the resources they need in terms of state funding.
And I did see that the governor increased the aid to state universities and colleges by just 1%. But when we're talking about higher education, we're talking about education from the preschool to the higher ed. What are you thinking at either end? Have you had any luck advocating in that area?
So also critical, because as I said at the outset, it really isn't. It's really what I would almost call cradle to grave. Because in today's economy, with technology and is changing so fast, and you constantly need to keep your skills up to date. You need to really think about education as a lifelong pursuit, right? So it is essential that every family has access to early education, childcare, and then education starting at 2-3 years old, and that should be universal. And then similarly, once you finish high school, that there are pathways for students, whether those are community college, public colleges or universities, or other good pathways like registered apprenticeships would be another example. We have in the legislature taken steps to expand funding. Certainly for K through 12, we're actually at historically high levels of funding, as well as to expand access to early education and funding for the UMass system and our colleges, state colleges. and community colleges. But there's no question we need to do more. And one of the big questions when you talk about increasing funding, for early ed, for K through 12, for higher ed, is where the funding is going to come from.
And we're going to get to that.
And I'm assuming we're going to get to that because that really is, it's
Right.
easy to talk about increasing funding and
Sure.
investing more, but really then you have to say how you're going to be able to pay for it. And I
Right.
have some thoughts on that.
Great. We'll be looking forward to hearing them. In the meantime, last week in Melrose, Malden area, there was a meeting down at Oak Grove train station to discuss a proposal for updating that facility.
Yes.
And we know that we are really fortunate here in Melrose and in the surrounding areas to have access to public transportation. But and we know that you had said on one of your websites, I believe, world-class public transportation is essential to the quality of life and continued economic growth in the greater Boston region, which is, of course, very true. But when people are standing on the platform in the middle of winter and trains are missing or not getting there,
Right.
We know that there's problems. So what's on your agenda for the coming legislative session should you win re-election?
So access to good transportation is another essential quality of life issue and essential to economic success and growth in the greater Boston region. So in some ways it goes hand in hand with education. We have a public transit system, the MBTA, which is old, which has a multi-billion-dollar maintenance backlog, just state of good repair, and which really we should be talking about not just how do we bring the system up to good repair, but how do we expand public transportation? How do we offer increased bus service, for example? How do we think about where we want to expand the commuter rail? And unfortunately, that's not the conversation that we've been seeing at this time, and certainly not the conversation from our governor. We definitely need to invest more than we are in the MBTA. I have supported increased funding in the MBTA in the past, and I believe, just like in education, that we need to be putting additional resources into maintenance and upgrading the MBTA infrastructure, including the commuter rail as well, and looking at ways to expand service as well, because having sort of safe, reliable, convenient public transit is not just good for those that use public transit, but it also is good for those who do have to use the roads, because anyone can see how congested the roads are. And the only way to relieve that congestion is going to be through greater use of public transportation. So it really behooves everybody in our communities to support the public transit system.
So we had kind of a setback, a disappointment this just a couple months ago with one of the funding sources that many people, including yourself, I believe, have been looking forward to accessing, which is the millionaire's tax, as they were calling it, which was going to be on the November ballot. And I think you had said you supported the Fair Share Amendment, or millionaire's tax, which I plan to refile as a legislative amendment in 2019, which would raise approximately $2 billion in new revenue for transportation and education. So that was disappointing. What does it mean that you're going to refile? What is that? What do you intend to do to help this happen?
Yes.
And we have to be quick on this.
For those viewers who may not be familiar with this was the Fair Share Amendment, or so-called millionaire's tax, is a proposal to assess a 4% surtax on income, annual income above $1 million a year.
Right.
So we're talking about families and households in Massachusetts that are very well off, not assets. This is income levels.
Okay.
And unfortunately, that was all set to be on the ballot in November. It looks like it would have enjoyed very strong support from the public. The legislature has voted on this multiple times with 70% support. But unfortunately, the Supreme Judicial Court ruled that it didn't meet certain legal requirements to be on the ballot. It's kind of technical. I announced the day after that I was not going to accept that this is dead, and I'm going to file in January, if I'm back in the legislature, essentially the same version, but I'm going to file it as a legislator, which has slightly different rules and procedures, and it would not be subject to the same concerns that the SJC had. So it would be able to move forward. And assuming we're successful, it will take some time, but I'm committed to this and will remain persistent and dogged.
So you'd be on the next state election
It would
ballot.
have to be on the ballot in 2022.
In 2022. Okay.
And it would have to go through several steps in the legislature, but I'm confident that it can do that. I've already spoken to the Senate President, Senator Karen Spilka, who's also supportive, and I believe that gives us a pathway to as much as $2 billion, and that money would have to be used for education purposes and transportation, the two things we've been talking about, which we desperately need investment in.
Well, I hate to say this, but I guess we're sort of out of time for this segment anyways, but we really appreciate your answers and your thoughtfulness on this. Welcome back. I'm Mary Beth McAteer-Margolis from MMTV, and this is our special edition of On Main Street. With us right now is our challenging candidate for the State Senate Democratic primary for the 5th Middlesex District, Sam Hammer.
Hi.
Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is your first time at MMTV.
I feel so honored to be here with you.
Oh, yeah, you should, really. No, thank you really for taking the time. I know you've been out there working really hard and spending a lot of time, and we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to do this.
Of course.
Sam is a local Melrosian, big political activist around town, and former chairperson of the Melrose Democratic City Committee. So if you want to fill in a few more blanks, Sam, and tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and why you're running for this seat.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. So I never thought I would run for public office. I've always been the person inside doing the work of public service in government. But now more than ever, I really believe that we need some new voices on Beacon Hill to get us the progress that we deserve. And I'm very passionate about our economic crises that are crushing working families right now, including student loan debt, the cost of childcare, the housing market in this area, and senior care as well. And so I believe I have the perspective. It's one thing to have compassion for people, but it's quite another to have actually walked in their shoes. I care about working family issues because I have lived them, and we are still living them as a family in Melrose. I also believe we should have and hire people to make decisions who actually have delivered public service direct to the people before. I have seen what bad decision-making can do to people, and I've also seen what good decisions can do to empower people. I was a Boston Public High School teacher. I worked at City Hall in Boston on economic development and the South Boston waterfront revisioning, working to get global companies to come to the city. I then worked at the state in technology and was last at the Treasury in economic empowerment. But there was quite a difference when you are actually delivering public service to the people. And the third thing is passion. If you can't tell, I'm very passionate about this, but passion is what separates those who do a good enough job from those who are really wishing to push the boundaries of what's possible. Passion is what separates those who take all the right votes from somebody who's willing to advocate for what's right and stand up to leadership when votes don't make it to the floor at all. And passion is what keeps me going when the political establishment keeps telling me to wait my turn. So that's why I'm running. Perspective, experience, and passion.
Great dedication and mission and out there. And speaking of mission, I know you've been out pounding the pavement.
Yep.
And you've heard from a lot of constituents. What are you hearing from them in terms of what they think the key issues are in our district? And then let's talk about a little bit what you envision yourself doing to help resolve those.
Sure. So we have knocked thousands of doors. I'm out every weeknight and weekends, mornings, and evenings now. And when somebody comes to the door and I introduce myself, I say, my name is Sam Hammer, and I'm running because I believe we need new voices on Beacon Hill to get us the progress we deserve. And they say, yes, we do. We talk about the economic crises that are crushing working families, the ones that I mentioned before, and they all agree, regardless of what constituent is answering the door, age, color, race, nationality, gender, everybody agrees that working families in Massachusetts and working people we are just getting crushed, and Beacon Hill seems to be not paying attention and not responding with the urgency that we need. And this session made it crystal clear.
So one of the things that we talked about with Senator Lewis was education.
Sure.
And I guess that's, although you didn't mention it by name in your constituents' concerns, I think much of it ties in with all of those. And I know that you have personally been a big advocate for universal pre-K and all-day kindergarten, and also college affordability and student loan debt. So talk to us a little bit, if you would, about your concerns about those, what you think should be done, and how you would go about accomplishing that.
Sure. So I talk about the cost of childcare. I had twins, and so when I went back to work, it actually cost me to go to work. It was my entire check plus an extra $10 take-home pay, and it was a double punch in the gut. I knew then that something was really off about what was happening in our economy. So the cost of daycare is clearly crushing early families. Specifically, happens to fall mostly on women. If we end up being the caregiver, sometimes women can't afford to go back to work, and so they drop out of the workforce altogether, which makes it even harder to reenter. But 1,200 children in Melrose alone do not have a spot at a licensed daycare. And throughout the district, that's 4,500 children do not have a spot in a licensed daycare. Okay. And that's a business development opportunity for our town and for other towns in the district that is absolutely a huge barrier for young families and for working families. The state underfunds around 24,000 low-income vouchers for families that really need those vouchers to cover the cost of care. And if we're ever going to be real about universal pre-K, we need to stop underfunding that and cutting that budget back and actually putting it in our Department of Education where it belongs. Okay. When it comes to college education and higher ed, we should not be making money off of our own children. Higher education in our public institutions should be free. It was free for me when I went to the University of Florida. I got off on the right foot because I did not have college debt, but we are saddling our children with around $34,000 in debt on average at our public institutions. And when it comes to public education, K through 12, as a Boston Public High School teacher, I believe in the public school system. But being a Melrose resident, I am feeling the pain of the state not satisfying their end of the bargain between reimbursements from charter schools, reimbursements for special ed, and the funding formula alone, which is antiquated and has been worked on for a number of years, as you know.
Yes.
That did not pass again in this session. My children and my city can wait no longer.
We're going to talk about that momentarily.
Great.
One of the things when you were talking about economic development, and we see it as key to the area and to the region, is transportation.
Yep.
And I know that you have said we need to properly fund the operating budgets for the MBTA and regional systems, making aggressive capital investments for high-impact projects, and be very bold in finally getting rid of the MBTA's debt burden. I think that sounds great.
Yeah.
How are we going to do that,
Great.
Sam?
So one thing that has been perfectly clear since Governor Baker got into office is that there is no interest from him or the T-Board to actually increase their operating budget from the state. They don't want the money. They feel like it's a waste of taxpayer dollars to be putting additional funds, and they are not interested in raising revenue either.
And this is, who is it? The MBTA board?
And Charlie Baker, yes.
Okay, the governor and the board. Okay.
But we need to really fund appropriately their operating budget. But let's talk about some quick wins.
Okay.
So our regional transit authorities should have the ability to work with their neighboring cities and towns to find a way to increase revenue within those cities and towns. Right now, that they are limited from doing that. In that case, they can pick specific projects that work for them and try to have those projects happen on a regional level. We also don't have a regional transportation advisory group that can help actually plan for an entire group of cities and towns. Right now, legislators have to go and advocate per project, which doesn't make any sense. But on bold investments,
yes,
it's not a crazy idea anywhere else but Massachusetts. But if we had a public state bank, we could consolidate all of our debt. Yes, we could consolidate all of our debt there and actually be paying ourselves instead of paying private lenders. That also is included anything that the Treasury holds. We should be paying ourselves the interest instead of a private bank. And some public banks actually lend out student loans direct to students and consumers of student loan products. So we can keep the interest rates low for students needing those loans in the Commonwealth.
And these public banks are funded by, how
Well-
are we fund them? Are we funding them with revenue that we're taking in, or reserves, or?
Sure. Well, right now, the state has a large pile of money,
Mhm.
and we put it in a private bank. And that private bank makes interest. And then they also issue more loans to make interest off of those loans. If we had a state bank and a public bank where we could just retain our own capital
Mhm.
and issue loans to ourselves for some of our public projects, or issue loans to consumers for consumer projects, not only student loan debt, but potentially mortgages as well. It's a little risky, but again, with some smart, savvy people at the state, we can certainly pull this off. It is not a radical idea. Other countries have it, and North Dakota, I think we can pull this off too.
North Dakota has it.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's not prohibited on a federal level or anything like that. I'm
It
not
just-
really familiar with it, so
Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing more about it.
It
And
just takes political courage.
Okay. So one of the things that we thought was going to come to fruition this fall that really didn't was the vote on the ballot, an opportunity for the voters to weigh in on the millionaire's tax, which is known as the Fair Share Amendment.
Mhm.
And you were, sounded a little disappointed, but you had a couple of other ideas. You just said raise taxes on everyone by raising taxes and implementing massive deductions for low and middle income earners. We could achieve essentially the same results as the proposed amendment. The best part, the legislature has the authority to do this right now. That, I know your opponent is putting forward a legislation to revisit this fair share tax in another session, the upcoming session, but it won't come to fruition for a ballot for at least 2 years, maybe longer.
4 years, actually,
4 years,
until
I think.
2022.
Yeah, I think you said 4 years.
Mhm.
So tell me in the meantime what your idea is about raising taxes on everybody.
Well, it would essentially be on all, but again, the deductions would be extremely steep so that we would have a progressive tax structure, which
Okay.
we are one of the last states in the entire country to have a progressive income tax. We have to get there. We have massive income inequality in Massachusetts. We are either 6th or 8th in the nation for our income inequality. We have some people who are doing quite well here who actually want to make contributions to the state for services to help fix the tea so that their employees can get to work on time.
Right.
They want to be able to help our education system so that all of our children are educated equitably. We have to be able to provide and be, again, bold and courageous to make those adjustments. Governor Patrick tried to do it to 6% not that long ago. It seemed crazy then. It doesn't seem so crazy now. Now that they've waited another 2 years for this millionaire's tax to pass,
Right.
and we're not even having it. They put all of our eggs in one basket, and the basket totally crashed. And we have nothing now to move us forward.
Well, the state revenues have increased, that we know. The budget is up about 3.5% from what it was in the past. But again, those are, a drop in the bucket, as you say, to really address some of those major issues. One revenue generator that you mentioned on your website, we didn't have a chance to talk to Senator Lewis about this, although he has a lot of experience. He chaired this commission way back when it started, is cannabis.
Sure.
Coming to a town near you soon, coming to Melrose soon. And you view it as a revenue generator, as a job, as employment opportunities. Tell us a little bit about that. What do you think about that
Sure.
in relation to substance abuse and things like that?
Well, I'll talk about it in economic development terms first,
right,
and then we'll
okay.
see. Hopefully, I won't run out of time.
Okay.
And so it's very, first I'll point out the elephant in the room that Senator Lewis is well known for being an obstructionist on this bill. I voted yes on question 4. I say I've met grandmas and preschool moms throughout the district who confess to me like a priest that they are consumers. And it's for their quality of life. Not all can get a medicinal license. The stigma, we have to work on the stigma because we just have to be more accepting of this medicine, this substance, because it is here and the people have spoken. With that said, when I look at our city budget and our middle school model is getting dismantled over a few $100,000s a year, and knowing that if we had a cannabis retail operation in town by that time, we would have had some extra revenue to have kind of staved off some of those budgetary issues.
Right.
But this is an economic development opportunity now. These are real businesses that are growing and thriving, no pun intended.
Right.
These are good paying jobs. There are lots of jobs, and we should also talk about it in terms of refixing or fixing our the impact that it's had on marginalized communities. So it's a way for young folks and people of color who have been disproportionately affected by incarceration rates of this cannabis,
Right.
to help expunge their records and get them back to work. So I think this is a great opportunity for Massachusetts.
Well, thanks, Sam. And I think this is a great opportunity for Melrose and our surrounding communities to consider both you and Senator Lewis and your positions, and get out and vote on September 4th, the day after Labor Day. In the Democratic state primary, we have incumbent Jason Lewis, challenger Melrose's own Sam Hammer. And you, just to let people know, you can be an unenrolled voter and still vote in a primary. You just go and declare what your ballot you would like, and it doesn't enroll you in a party. So please consider both of these terrific candidates and get out and vote on September 4th. Thanks, Sam.
Thank
It was
you.
great talking with you.
You too.
And I hope you'll come back again.
I definitely will.
Great.
Thanks.